very proud of the Armenian studies, both the lecture series and the courses. We have worked very hard to make this happen. And of course, we're not stopping where we are. We make progress after progress. I want to thank a couple of individuals before we start the program. I'd like Vahe and Armine Mevruni to stand up so that everyone knows who they are. Armine and Vahe are great personalities, great people. They have been helping us tremendously. They donated an endowment fund which made it possible for us to start the lecture series, so we feel very comfortable to have Professor Daryai invite the lecturers because of their support. Thank you so much, Vahe and Armine. And there are a couple of people in the audience that I want to thank. Seta Yahupian, she was one of our supporters from day one. Seta, you can stand up so people, okay. And Lydia Alishan, where's Alishan? Alishan was working to make sure that Lydia can write a donation every year. Once a year we have a fundraising in December for the courses, and this year I'm very happy to announce that we have passed the $30,000 fundraising. And speaking of fun, and of course I want to recognize Susanna Petrosyan, Hasmik, Hidgosian, Ani, I don't know if
I'm here.
Hi, Ani. We love the students. They are a great support system. We work very well together. Susanna is at USC, by the way. She's doing her master's in international studies, and yet she is here at every lecture, which makes us feel great. And whatever we do here, we do it for the students. Trust us. So, having said all that, I want to invite Chuck Barsam to the podium and Professor Daryai.
No, I'm right in front.
Oh, okay. I'm very blessed to be, have been and still be associated with several organizations that are benefactors of the UCI Armenian Studies. One of them is, if some people might recall, the American Armenian International College that was at University of Liberation, just short-lived Armenian program there, and when it liquidated, the funds went to AGBU. They're being held there, and AGBU has graciously agreed to have at least a $5,000 contribution per year from that fund to the UCI Armenian Studies. So here's, first of all, in memory of those who nobly contributed to AAIC and through AGBU, here's $5,000 check to arrive. And second, there is a very good organization, very renowned organization in Orange County called the Orange County Armenian Professional Society. A number of you are members here and know much about that organization. That organization has made a pledge to contribute $5,000 a year for several years. I don't know how many years are left, but I know this is one of them. So on behalf of all of the members of the Orange County Armenian Professional Society and people who contributed to that organization, who I know would be proud to be associated with UCI Armenian Studies, what it's providing, its direction, and the culture it brings to all of us, I'd like to give another check for $5,000. And I don't know if that puts us over $40,000 now, but
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chuck, thank you so much. I'd like to thank, sure. Before I should say I was going to cash this check myself, but Marianne is standing right here from the dean's office, so I can hand it over now. Please, please.
I have to apologize. I need to thank Garo and Salpi. They are fantastic, the Agopian couple. They have joined us for the past 2 or 3 years. They are supporters of the studies, and again, my apologies to come late with your name, but they're a great couple. They're very involved in the community. They're highly educated. They love literature. So you are the right couple to be here, and I thank you. Last but not least, I would love to give my thanks on behalf of all of us to Professor Turaj Daryai, who has been a mentor, a leader, and a facilitator to make sure that the program, the lectures, and the courses go forward. Turaj, thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia's been very kind, as well as, of course, Chuck with those 2 checks, which will keep Armenian lectures and courses going. I think it was 2007, now that I've been told correctly, that I met Sylvie, and we had lunch. And just to tell you why teaching Armenian history is important, I'm not Armenian, as you would probably guess now from my name. I had just taken, not an elective, but a course that I wanted to take at UCLA when I was a grad student, Ancient Armenia, and then Medieval Armenia with Professor Hovhannisyan. And just taking those courses changed my perspective for what I was doing, which wasn't specifically Armenian history. The importance of Armenian sources and Armenia for understanding actually the region for the time I was interested in late antiquity. And it's because of those 2 courses that, once I had a job here, and of course meeting Sylvie, we conspired to have Armenian courses and lectures being offered at UC Irvine. And so Sylvie says, okay, if you can't do this, I will, make sure that there's funding to get this going. And that's how I think it started, if my recollection is correct. So we've been teaching ancient medieval and then modern Armenian history for the past several years. I think on the menu now is to expand this for a 3rd course and or to teach Armenian language as well. So that is, I think, quite good, and we should, steadily grow. I am planning in March, I hope, of this coming year to have a conference on Armenian identity through the ages. So it'll be a 1-day conference on Armenian identity from, let's say, 1000 BC till 2014. That is something else that is on our list of things to do. Now, if you don't have the handout for next month's lecture, let me just mention that Karabagh is going to be speaking and I think showing part of the film, how Screamers and System of a Down, which is a band, of course, right? Widen the parameters of public debate about Armenian genocide. That will be the talk for, and I think it's quite apt, maybe it should have been this month, but it will be still close, on May 22nd. And I think there's some of these flyers on the table. So if you're interested, please do so. There's an email list there in front for those who haven't actually been here before. So if you want to be on our email list, please sign there. And before I actually introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to ask Ani Aslanyan, please, to say a few words. Ani?
Hi everyone, many of you know I'm the co-cultural chair of Armenian Students Association at UC Irvine. I just wanted everyone to let everyone know about next week's events that will be going on at the UC Irvine campus in commemoration of the 99th year of the Armenian genocide. On April 23rd, we will have a silent protest on Ring Road, which is directly in front of Langston Library. And at night, we will have a screening of the film Sunrise over Lake Van. On the 24th, we will have again a silent protest from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. In front of Langston at the flagpoles. And the 24th, we're going to have a commemoration night with guest speakers, performances, and poetry, art that will celebrate the life of those that contributed before the Armenian genocide was perpetuated, and the professors will shed light on their research or their insight regarding the Armenian genocide. So we've publicized this event throughout campus, and it would be a great honor to see everyone there. Thank you.
So, tonight's talk. It's a pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Roman Smbatyan, who has studied at the Yerevan State University. And his work is mainly on the relations between the Middle East and the Caucasus in the 18th century, and I think that's the topic of tonight's talk. Between 2010 and 2012, he's been an assistant professor at the Yerevan State University, where he taught history of the Caucasus, namely, of course, Armenia, Georgia, and Iran. And then also another course on history of Islam in the Caucasus region, as well as historiography of Armenia. Yeah. He's a member of the ARAMCAT, the Armenian Association for Academic Partnership and Support, which we will probably hear more about in the future, as we have some other people from Armenia who probably will come to talk about the ARAMCAT and its importance. The most recent publication, I'll just mention this one, is entitled Nader's Religious Policy Towards Armenians, which is written for a fest trip for Professor Garnik Asatrian on the occasion of his 60th birthday, a well-known figure, at least in Armenia. Tonight's talk, of course, as you can see on the screen, is entitled The Liberation Movement of Armenia in the First Half of the 18th Century, Rebellions in Syunik and Artsakh. Please, welcome.
Thank you so much for such a warm introduction, and thank you for such a great opportunity to give this talk today and to be here, and I'm very excited. Thank you. So, as you can see, the topic is about the Liberation Movement of Armenian in 18th century, and first of all, I would like to provide some prehistory about the origins of the liberation movement in Armenia, and after that introduce the events of the rebellion in Artsakh and Syunik. So after the fall of Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia in 1375 and rulership of Zakharians in Armenia in 1350, Armenia once again in its history lost its independence and fell under the rule of foreign empires. It was only in mid-16th century that then the religious and actual leaders of Armenian people, although very vague and romantic, but started to plan the liberation of Armenian people from the Ottoman and Safavid yoke. Catholicos of Holy Smbatyan Stepanos of Salmast in 1547 traveled Europe and had negotiations with various European leaders, including Pope, and even accepted that Armenians could adopt Catholicism and union with Roman Catholic Church if European rulers contributed in liberation of Armenia. But these efforts were useless because European countries themselves were in war with the Ottomans, and problem had problems in preventing further Ottoman incursion into Eastern Europe. Some result can be observed later in that century when Catholicos of Mikhail of Smbatian sent Abgar of Tokhat, or Abgar Tokhatesi, to Europe, and whose work was followed by his son Sultan Shah. But these initiatives were also baseless and romantic beliefs that Christian Europe would liberate the Christian fellows in the East. In the second half of the 17th century, Armenian merchants of Isfahan, called Khojas, have created strong economic and personal relations with growing Russian state and signed profitable, both for Russians and themselves, treaties of silk trade. Among them were Khoja Zakhar Smbatian and Grigor Lusikens, or Lusikov, in Russian manner, who was also the official representative of Iranian Shah. These Khojas were actually the first Armenians who changed the growing power in the north, that is the Russian Empire, which especially during the reign of Peter the Great claimed to liberate and protect in Varanda with the monastery of Tsovatech Avetaranot. The fourth Sernakh was in Shushi, or Karabagh, the famous fortress of Shushi, which still exists today. And the last Sernakh was the Sernakh of Dizak, with centers in Tokh, village of Tokh, and mountainous stronghold of Kirs. Each of these Sernakhs had military forces conscripted from villages of Karabagh and Ganzak. As you may know, Karabagh and Ganzak during the Safavid rule were united in one Beglerbegi, or region, administrative region of Iranian Empire, and the center was in Ganzak. But here just in the beginning of the 18th century, we have also some major change in this administrative division. Their whole forces the forces of these all five Sernakhs could count from 5,000 to 6,000, and this amount would reach to 30,000-40,000 people when many Armenians from villages around the Sernakhs would join the battles against, let's say, the regional, local nomad tribes or the Ottoman army that was going to invade the region. So during the Lesbian invasions of the late 1710s and in the beginning of 1720s, one of these prominent soldiers or generals of these Sernakhs was Avan Yuzbashi, who was to become the leader of all the liberation movement and rebellion in Artsakh. And just at this time, after the end of the Northern War, where the Russia defeated the Sweden Empire, Peter, as he promised to Israel Ori and later to Minas Vartapet and other leaders of liberation movement, Russia was going to implement the Caspian expedition and to take the control of the Caspian coastal territories with perspective also taking control of Georgia and Armenia, eastern Georgia and Armenia. And by expecting this very important event, the Armenian and Georgian forces started to unite. And at that time in Georgia we have still an autonomous kingdom led by Vakhtang, and in Armenia, of course, we have the Melikdoms. Here in map you can see Armenian Melikdoms of Syunik and Artsakh, and they are, of course, neighboring territories also today, Syunik and Artsakh. Of course, there were also Meliks in Gevarkunik and Lori, but they were not as strong as and didn't have as much autonomy as Meliks of Karabagh and Syunik. So the Armenian forces of Artsakh, forces of Meliks, headed by the Armenian Catholicos of Gandzasar Petros, met with Georgian forces in Cholak village near Gandzak or Ganja in September of 1722. The main purpose of unifying these forces was, of course, to join the army of Russian army and to start the liberation, both Eastern Armenia and Georgia. The Georgian army was about 30,000 under the leadership of King Vakhtang himself, and the Armenian military forces of Karabagh were 10,000 under the command of Catholicos Gandzasar Yesai Hassan Jalalian. So they were there to join, as I mentioned, the Russian army of Peter, which was expected to enter Shirvan at that time. But their expectations were in vain, as Peter considered it not expedient to fight the Ottomans and to strain relations with Iranian authorities. So he was satisfied by taking control of Darband and Baku by the end of 1723 and withdrew his main forces from the Caucasus, leaving Russian fortified garrisons in Darband and Baku. Armenian and Georgians had no choice but to resist the Ottoman invasion and claim autonomy each in their country. So here we have two very important treaties. Treaty of St. Petersburg in 1723 between Russia and Iran, due to which Russia would take the control of the coastal Caspian territories of Caucasus and Iran, from Darband to Astarabad, and the Treaty of Istanbul, due to which Istanbul of 1724, due to which Russia and the Ottoman would divide the Caucasian territory. Russia would take the same coastal territories of the Caucasus, and the Ottomans will take control of Eastern Armenia and Eastern Georgia. And so, although Russian Emperor Peter the Great declared himself to be the protector and liberator of Christians from the yoke of Ottoman Empire, we can see that this was only an outer veil for the real political plans of Peter, who was inclined to take control of the international silk trade by invading important ports in Baltic, Black and Caspian seas, and especially Caucasian and Iranian regions rich in silk production, that is Shirvan, Karabagh and Gilan. And the orientation of Armenian Catholicos and Meliks, as well as Georgian King Vakhtang towards Russia, allowed Peter the Great to implement this the above-mentioned Caspian expedition and take control of over Baku and Darband. But after the fail of the Russian invasion of the Caucasus and the expectations of Armenians and Georgians, here where we have in 1724 we have a very important, interesting, we can say, treaty signed between Armenians of Gandzak and Shi'i community also living in Gandzak in March of 1724 to help each other during the Ottoman invasion. The thing was that even the Shi'i population of the Caucasus was so horrified with the Ottoman control, with the perspective of the Ottoman invasion, that they signed this unique treaty, which is really unique, and in some historical sources they mentioned that this is maybe the only treaty between Armenians and Turkic-speaking Shi'i population of Caucasus, that they signed this treaty to help each other. And this treaty was, of course, recommended by the Russians and the Russian authority, who wanted to organize a strong barrier against the Ottomans. So new Armenian leaders that came from Iranian Armenian merchant circles at this time were the personalities that would contribute mostly in the development of the Liberation Movement, especially Ivan Karapet and Petros Disarkis Gilanets and his followers, who have pro-Russian position and meanwhile were inclined to transform anti-Safavid movement of Christian Armenians and Georgians into an anti-Ottoman rebellion. The thing was that after the fall of the Safavid Empire in the Caucasus, there was a vacuum of the central government, and all the territories, both in northern Caucasus and in South Caucasus, they themselves began to govern themselves. They claimed autonomy, and of course Armenians and Georgians couldn't be should be a part of it, especially taking into consideration the fact that the Lezgis were invading all these territories and sacking the villages, Armenian inhabited villages near Ganzak and of course Karabagh. And this also urged that Armenian Meliks constructed their sarnaks, their strongholds in the mountainous region, and began to defend the Armenian people of the Karabagh region. So, in 1724-1725, after conquering Yerevan, Lori and Ganzak, the 6,000 Ottoman forces attacked Varanda, that is one of the Sarnaks and regions of Artsakh. This is an Armenian map, but Varanda is this part of the base Artsakh. And settled in 33 villages of this region. But at night, Armenian soldiers of Varanda, Sarnakh of Varanda, killed all the Turkish askars settled in the villages. After this heavy defeat, the Ottomans determined to send an even bigger army of 15,000 soldiers under the command of Saru Mustafa Pasha in 1726. The Ottoman forces attacked famous impregnable fortress of Shushi, firing with heavy artillery. But Avan Yuzbashi, who was the leader of the rebellion and organized the defense of Shushi, after 6 days of heavy artillery strikes and after losing about 800 soldiers and 2 generals, forced the Turkish army to leave the Varanda region. But again, they were successful later to invade the Shushi fortress. And Avan Yuzbashi, together with the remnants of his forces, fled to Dizak. Dizak is this part of today's Karabagh. So we have here Varanda and Dizak. Jirabert and Gulistan is this part of it. And here is Khashatar or Khachen, and this is Verin Khachen. So Avan Yuzbashi, after the Ottoman forces invaded the Shushi fortress, Avan Yuzbashi was forced to flee to Dizak and joined Tarkhan Yuzbashi, another Armenian leader of this rebellion, who was holding the stronghold of Togh village. Togh is one of the villages of Dizak, and it is over. After the long and severe clashes in Togh, both Avan and Tarkhan Yuzbashis were forced to relinquish the rebellion and move to Russia. Although the Ottomans took control of Shushi, Armenian forces continued the rebellion by sudden guerrilla attacks on Turkish forces. And we still have this movement continued in 1729 till 1731. the most severe resistance of this period was against the Ottoman rule in Gulistan, where the head of the Sırnak was Abraham Sparapet, or who was famous in Turkish sources as Yavur Abraham. He unified all the remnants of Armenian forces and even Karaçorlu Kurds that inhabited these territories to fight the joint army of Ibrahim Pasha of Yerevan, Mahmud Pasha of Bayazid, and pro-Ottoman forces of Dagestan and Shirvan. Altogether about 30,000 people. Unified Ottoman army was fighting against a small stronghold of Sırnak of Abraham in Gulistan, and the estimated force of the Armenian Sırnak was they were about 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers defending the Sırnak. The Ottoman Sultan was furious about this rebellion and the resistance of Armenians in Karabagh, and ordered to invade and destroy all centers of resistance in Karabagh and Syunik. Because at the same time we have also the rebellion of Syunik, about which I will talk later. Though the Karabagh rebellion was suppressed by the Turks, but until 1738 there were still guerrilla fighters who never accepted the Ottoman rule and joined the new Iranian leader Nadir Uli, who, after liberating Iran from Afghan invaders, first time in summer of 1734, moved his army toward the Caucasus, and Armenian forces under the leadership of Melik Yegan of Tokh, who was the new leader of this Tokh Sırnak, joined Nadir's army to retake eastern Armenia and the Caucasus. It was at this time that after entrance of Iranian army into Caucasus, we have the new administrative region called Moluke Khamsa, or Melikdom Khamsa. Khamsa in Arabic means five. It was the united 5 Sırnaks in one administrative region called Melikdom of Khamsa, and Melik Yegan of Tokh was assigned by Nadir as the Beglerbek, or the leader of all Karabagh region. This was the first time that Armenians were directly administered by the Shah, not by the governor of Azerbaijan sitting in Tabriz or other Muslim rulers, but they have to govern themselves in Karabagh region and could levy taxes and send them directly to Shah. And this was, of course, one of the gains of this rebellion in Karabagh. And at the same time, we have the rebellion in Syunik from 1723 to 1730. Syunik, the name Syunik derives from the name Syunya, the first dynasty that ruled in this region in 1st century AD. Then we have, of course, the famous Nakharar family of Syunis, that their main, of course, stronghold in the region where they governed for centuries was Syunik. And of course, this region of Armenia today also is called Syunik, although in Soviet period it was called also Zangezur. The main source about the Syunik rebellion is the famous selected history of David Bek, written by the Mkhitarist abbot Łukasz of Smbatian, and it was written due to the memoirs of one of the active participants of Syunik rebellion, Stepanos Shaumyan of Meghri. According to this book, in the beginning of 1720s, about 50 Armenian Meliks, Kathodas and Tanuters of Gaphan in Syunik wrote a request to Georgian King Vakhtang to send one of his Armenian generals to to Syunik and to organize the rebellion of local Armenians against the foreign rule. Here on the map we can see the Syunik region, and his name is Zangezur here, and this is Raphan and the famous fortress of Halizor, the center of the Syunik rebellion. The remaining walls and parts of the fortress still exist in Halizor today. So the Georgian king Vakhtang sent David Bek, famous Armenian leader and general, to Syunik. There are some controversial opinions about the origin of David Bek. Some claim that he was from Syunik, that's why he was so anxious to come and to lead the rebellion. But some other sources say that he, as he was called David Maskhetatsi, he was from Tiflis, or from the Armenians of Tiflis. But in any case, this was not very important. By arriving in Syunik in 1723, David Bek was urged to suppress, first of all, the nomads, the Muslim tribes of this region, especially Karachoorlu Kurds and Turkic Javanshir tribes in Vorotan and Raphan, and to unify all Armenian forces from Mevri to Raphan, today's Syunik Mars of Armenia, as you know, begins from south from Mevri and to Raphan and Goriz. And all this region, he unified all Armenian forces, and all Armenian Meliks and local leaders, inspired by this first resolute victory of David Bek over the nomads, hurried to join him. David Bek was using guerrilla tactics by unexpectedly attacking with small, well-armed groups at prevailing military forces of the enemy. At the same time, he began to fortify all the existing fortresses and built also the new fortress of Halizor. Here it is. Fortress of which is near Raphan. In 1724, David Bek took control of the whole Raphan region, and it was at this time that about 2,000 Armenian forces of Karabagh Sagnaks, the above-mentioned Karabagh Sagnaks, headed by Avan Yuzbashi and Ivan Karapet, arrived in Raphan to help David Bek. At this period, we can say in 1724, the Syunik rebellion was in full swing, and it was against the struggle was against the tribes, Kurdish and Turkic tribes, and at the same time in Karabagh there wasn't a major threat. So this is why the Avan Yuzbashi and Ivan Karapet could afford to come and help Syunik with their forces. And the main centers of Syunik rebellion were there were some centers from Raphan to Mevri. The garrison of Shinuhai had about 550 soldiers, and were commanded by Bayandur and other Armenian soldiers. The Tatev monastery had 40 soldiers led by Gijin, Aydin, Yesai and other commanders, and of course the famous fortress of Halizor, which was led by Melik Parsadan with 250 soldiers, and Teravetis, one of the closest commanders of David Bek, with more than 400 soldiers. The other center was Chavandur, that had about 2,000 fighters and was led by Toros, and Galer, that had about 700 soldiers commanded by Bab, and whose assistant was the Stefano Shaumian, due to whose memoirs was written the famous selective history of David Bek. And the last one was in Mehri garrison, with 400 people led by Konstantin and other Armenian leaders of the rebellion. So till 1725, we have only the fights against the local nomadic tribes of various origins, but the situation changes in 1725 when the Ottoman army enters the Syunik region. The first clashes were humiliating for the Ottoman forces. As a Russian agent of that time in the Caucasus, Tolstov states, and he was a witness, mentions that the force of David Bek completely defeated the Ottomans, and now there are no Turks in the region. The Ottomans changed they were forced to change their tactics, and by flattering and bribery began to instigate clashes among the Armenians and the Muslims of the region, intending to isolate David Bek and his forces. After some unequal fights in 1727, David Bek was urged to settle in Halidzor fortress and get prepared for the decisive fight against the Ottomans. The first battle was successful for the defenders of Halidzor, and they could throw back the enemy. After this success, David Bek continued his fights against local Turkic and Kurdish tribes in Agulis. And here the important thing to be mentioned is that David Bek is one of those Armenian leaders that completely realized that only by cleaning all these territories of Armenian inhabited territories from nomadic tribes of various origins, the Armenians could claim any kind of autonomy or independence. And it was not a surprise that the first work that he did was to suppress the Kurdish and Turkic-speaking tribes of the Zangezur region, or Syunik region. After the first victory of Halidzor, David Bek continued his fights against local Turkic and Kurdish tribes in Agulis. Agulis was in the border of Iran and Armenia, and here we have another interesting event. Iranian forces headed by Tahmasp II, the Iranian Shah, were fighting the Ottoman soldiers near Iranian-Armenian border, and David Bek sent his devoted commanders, Mkhitar Sparapet and Teravetis, to negotiate with Shah Tahmasp of Iran to fight the Ottoman army jointly. Both Tahmasp and David Bek have realized that the Ottomans are their common enemy and that they should unite their forces in the war against them. Shah Tahmasp not only approved this proposal, but also sent gifts and expensive clothing, khalat, to David Bek, recognizing his rulership in Hapan and granting him the right to mint coins. After catching an unknown disease, David Bek returned to Halidzor in 1728 and died there in the fortress of Halidzor. And his work was continued by his closest friend and commander, Mkhitar Sparapet. But the thing was that after losing their leader, many of Armenian meliks became skeptic about the future of this movement, and of course this was misused by the Ottoman authorities, and it was at this time that we can say the Ottomans could succeed to take the control of the Syunik. But still, in 1728, the Ottomans began to lay siege to Halidzor fortress, and the Armenian forces headed by Teravetis and Mekhitar Sparapet resisted about 7 days, and after heavy fights, and which is very surprising, the Ottomans could bribe one of the leaders of rebellion, Teravetis, and entered the fortress of Halidzor. They destroyed Halidzor fortress and took the control of all Ghapan region. But the center of the resistance was invaded and the rebellion was suppressed. But still, Mekhitar and his forces continued their struggle in other parts of Syunik, and until Mekhitar himself was, due to again treachery, was killed by his followers in Khanzoresk fortress, another region near Goris in Syunik. This was the end of the also Syunik rebellion, but still, as in Karabagh, the liberation movement in Syunik continued until 1734, when Armenian Meliks joined Iranian Shah Nadir upon Iranian armies' intrusion into the Caucasus. And Syunik too was considered as an Armenian territory by Nadir Shah and was led again by local Meliks, but the major leader of the Armenian Meliks was recognized, the mentioned Melik Yegan, and the famous Iranian historian Muhammad Kazem Marvi mentions that Melik Yegan, he was not, of course, in the Caucasus, but he was a contemporary historian of the region. He mentions that Melik Yegan of Tokh, of Karabagh, is the leader of all Armenia, from Yerevan to Karabagh. Of course, this was an exaggeration. Yegan was the most famous Melik of all in the Armenia, but at that time we had also Meliks in Gerarpunik, like Melik Akovjan, and we have Tanuters and Katvodas in Yerevan and Lori regions. The thing was that Melik Yegan was the only prominent Armenian Melik that provided a real army and soldiers, and also provision for Iranian army, and the Iranian army succeeded in taking control of the eastern Armenia. And as we know, Nadir had great relations with the Armenian Catholicos, Abraham Karetatsi or Abraham of Crete, and they both he restated all the rights of Armenian Meliks and also Holy See of Echmiadzin. And during this period, and we have the Karabagh region as a completely separate administrative region under the rule of Iranian Shah, and we can say that this period of time from 1720s till the end of the first half of 18th century, Armenians had relative autonomy in Karabagh, Syunik, and in eastern Armenia as a whole. And some concluding remarks about this movement. The liberation movement of Armenia finally, in 18th century, reached its active phase. The rebellions of Karabagh and Syunik showed that despite the foreign rule of centuries, the idea of independence and statehood and deliverance are still alive in Armenian entity and are key factors that will strongly determine later history of the Armenian people. After these rebellions, Armenian leadership showed farsightedness and allied with Nadir Shah, and Melik Yegan of Dizak became the ruler of United Karabagh. Armenians in all over the country and region were inspired to contribute in later development of liberation movement and the fulfillment of centuries' dream to revive the independent Armenian state. So, thank you very much. And if you have questions, it will be a pleasure to.
You talk about the Armenian armies and so on. I understand why the Ottomans would get armed, I understand the Iranians would be armed, but I'm assuming most of by the early 18th century, they're mostly armed with firearms. So where would the Armenians get their weapons?
Well, the Armenians didn't have artillery, and especially in Karabagh, they can use the mines of the Karabagh region, and they built their arms, their muskets and the firearms themselves, and also some arms were brought from Georgia, as I mentioned, David Beg and his followers came from Georgia, and this cooperation with Georgian forces in Ganzak also contributed in getting arms and armaments in their fight against the Ottomans.
It seems historically Armenia and Georgia have aligned together, like the Zakarians, Queen Tamar of Georgia together. They fought against the Seljuk and they beat them. And you mentioned about one of the battles, putting forces together, but then I didn't hear you talking more about Armenia and Georgia cooperation later on during the rebellion. Why didn't they go? First part of the question, what makes Georgia and Armenia get together? Is that religious part brings them together? And second part of my question is, why didn't they continue working and cooperating during the rebellion?
Yeah, thanks. And as I mentioned, Armenian and Georgian forces met in Cholak near Ganzak, and in 1724, and they were united to implement the unified program of liberation of both Eastern Georgia and Eastern Armenia with the help of Russian Empire. But after this plan failed, of course, both armies returned to their countries. But Georgians themselves claimed autonomy and independence, and they were to fight for that idea. And of course, they were busy with this, with the struggle against Ottoman invasion too, because Ottomans not only invaded Eastern Armenia, but invaded also Tiflis and Eastern Georgia. And why Georgian forces didn't help Armenians in Karabagh can be explained by this, because both regions were in the fight against the foreign invasion of the Ottomans. Later, after these rebellions, we of course have again the cooperation of Georgians and Armenians, especially during the liberation of Eastern Armenia in 19th century, when Russians finally decided to take control of the Caucasus, and again here we have Armenian forces fighting for liberating Georgia and Armenia, and of course Georgian forces together with Russian army fighting and liberating Karabagh and Eastern Armenia. And this cooperation can be explained, of course, by the not only from a religious point of view, but also we can say that in Caucasian region, Georgia and Armenia were the only nations that have had kingdom and civilization for ages and had statehood, and they were neighbors for centuries, from ancient times when we have kingdom of Yerlanduni, we have Matsketa kingdom in Georgia, and of course the same thing with Iranians. Why Armenians cooperated strongly with Iranians against the Ottoman Empire during all this medieval period. In my opinion, the first factor is the mutual history, cultural interactions, and of course, 1,000 years mutual civilization that people of this region created, and that was seized or was kind of challenged by the nomads beginning from 11th century, from Seljuk, Mongol, Turkmen invasions. Yeah.
First, thank you for your thorough presentation of this very important period of history.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One is about the name Azerbaijan. When was it first applied to the northern part, the Caucasus part of Azerbaijan? My other question is about the Soviet film, made 1970s, I think. Look at that spot a bit of David Beck, I forgot the title. There was a very high budget film by Soviet standards. And I remember at the end, I saw it, 1980 something. At the end, they showed some of the battles you're talking about, and then they showed Russian soldiers coming down through the snow. And was the implication that Russia came to save them, when in reality, Russia, 100 years later is when the Russians came.
No.
I wonder if you can say something about the film and how accurate the film is, how it's presented.
Of course. First of all, about Azerbaijan, well, it's a famous fact that about the northern territory of Artsakh River, the name Azerbaijan was first used in 1918. And there are many works about this historical reality. This region was named Shirvan and Daran for centuries. And before that was Albania, in different sources. And the name Azerbaijan is a historic name of Iranian province, which we have also today in Iran, too. Azerbaijan's eastern and western, and has nothing to do with today's Azerbaijani Republic. And the only reason, even some Iranian authors like Ayatollah Reza in his famous work of Aran and Azerbaijan explains this, and also famous Orientalist academician Bartold, the Russian prominent scientist, mentions that the only reason that they named this region Azerbaijan is to have later territorial demand to the southern territories, and that's what happens today. They claim about the bigger Azerbaijan, about the historical divided nation of Azerbaijan, but of course all the historical sources say just the opposite, because there is not a source that names the historical Shirvan and Aran Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a northwestern Iranian province for centuries in Armenian tradition, Aturpatakan, and it derives from Atropat, the famous the commander of Alexander the Great, who was sent to this territory and as a leader of Greek army, Macedonian army, and this name comes from Atropat, from his name. And later we have, as Professor Darya would correct me, in Middle Persian we have Adarbaigan, and Arabized version we have Azerbaijan or Adarbajan, which is the name of the, of course, historical province of Europe. And even I also read some archives about relating the period of constitutional revolution in Iran, and one of the leaders of Iranian revolution, Tagizadeh, wrote a letter to the leaders of the Musavat faction of Azerbaijan of this period, and asking a very simple question: why did you name your country Azerbaijan? And the answer is that, well, we didn't have any intention. We just wanted to make a state, and we don't have any name, and we just put it. It's just the same as General Denikin of the White Movement during the revolution of communist revolution in Russia mentions that everything, it is his words, not mine, everything in this about this country is artificial. Its name, its geographical borders, its even its language, because we have many Iranian-speaking people living in today's Azerbaijan, like Talishis, Tats, who are considered to be Azerbaijanis, Turkic Azerbaijanis. But of course, they still claim identity, and they have their identity. And we have Avars and Lazgis in the northern Azerbaijan, Republic of Azerbaijan, and so. But all of them, of course, it's the same policy of the Ottoman Empire that we have Armenians, Kurds. We don't have anybody. Everybody's Turk in our country. It's just the same policy in today's Azerbaijan. There are no Talishis, there are no Tats, any other people. All are Azerbaijanis. Regarding the film David Bek, of course, there isn't any Russian assistance. It was a propaganda, and the film was made to show that, well, although the Armenians were fighting for their independence, but still the leaders of this rebellion were they acted just in their own interest, and they didn't think about the proletariat, let's say the Soviet propaganda of the villagers, of the people, and it was just their, let's say, political interest of the time to claim leadership of this region and all that stuff. But of course, this was a Soviet propaganda just to minimize and to show that this was only something that any minor bourgeois or local noble will do in any region of any country.
We have time for one more question. Well, we have three.
Is there any ethnic kinship between the Azeris of Azerbaijan and Azeris of Iranian Azerbaijan? And also, isn't there a religious difference between the two?
There isn't any religious difference. Both are Shia, but lately, in the last 20 years, there are some implications that under the influence of Turkey, many Azerbaijanis convert to Sunnism. But well, still the main populace is Shia. But as to ethnic background, of course we cannot completely deny any connection, but the most important thing is that what do Turkic-speaking Iranians living in Azerbaijan think about this new republic? Do they think that they are their like ethnic fellows, or they are just the Turkic-speaking tribes from Mongolic or Seljuk period? The thing is that there is a journal in Tabriz named Aran that its main purpose is propaganda of the historic reality that if there is a territory to be united, that is the Republic of Azerbaijan to be united to historical Iran, because this is the historical Aran and Shirvan that has nothing to do with the name of Azerbaijan. As to ethnic background, of course, they lived for centuries in the same territory, and many Turco-Mongolic tribes that came into Iran, they mainly settled in Adur-Batakan or Azerbaijan, and of course in the Caucasus. And there was also a policy of resettlement of Turkic tribes by Safavid Shahs. They, as their reliable forces in the region, they settled Qajars and other tribes in this region. But the thing is that the language is not is very important, but is not a key marker of identity for any ethnic group. And as I mentioned also to my students, like in Brazil, we have Portuguese-speaking people, but we can never call them Portuguese because, and there are many examples of this. When conquering ethnic element comes to a region and invades the region, the language of this conqueror is a prestige language, and this becomes common for all the populace of the region. But it doesn't mean that all the region is all of a sudden or during the centuries completely Turkicized. Okay, they accepted the language, but not the Iranian identity. And the same way, Azerbaijanis, of course, pervert the Iranian history. They say that Safavid Empire is an Azerbaijani empire, and it were Azerbaijanis that created Safavid Qajar Empire in Iran. And of course, this is absurd. There is no comment about that.
Now, if you want to talk to him, you can. Please go ahead.